Hey guys, listen up. Right now, I'm going to tell you the story of my incredible escape from Opinionville. This is one of the craziest things that has ever happened. You are not going to want to miss this. Alright, so I got drugged and I woke up in Opinionville. And then...
Well, hello once again.
Okay, dude, not now.
I'm chemist John Morris Pendleton.
Yes. Hello, John. Look, I gotta get to this story. I will get to you, but just give me a minute.
I'm chemist John Morris Pendleton.
Alright, listen, how about I deal with you and then you go away for a while and let me actually get something done around here like telling this story. Sound good?
This is fantastic.
Alright, fine. Okay, what do you got?
This is our second conference of a two-part series about the flood.
Oh man, this is the one where you machine gunned a bunch of flood myths at me and I wanted to shoot myself to death in the mouth. Assuming that's what this is gonna be, this may not end well.
Here's a new one that I just got from the internet. This is fantastic. In the Andes Mountains of Peru, there are these giant fossilized oysters. The problem is they're at 13,000 feet.
Okay, well I know the quality of your research and you just said that you just found this on the internet. Probably on the 2001 or 2002 or whenever these videos came out equivalent of Reddit. So I don't know if these so-called oysters are real or if they're just rocks that look like oysters, and frankly I don't care. Because to anyone with a grade school knowledge of how mountains are formed, having real fossilized oysters on the top of a mountain is not a mystery. We've discussed this before, John. You have no excuse not to know how mountains are formed. It's very simple.
In Psalm 104 it says, "Who laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not be removed forever? Who covered it with the deep with a garment, and the waters stood above the mountains, the highest mountains at that time."
You know, way back in the Stone Age or whatever, when people first wondered why there were oysters and shit on top of mountains, it probably sounded really sensible to say, well, the water must have been higher than the mountains. But now we know that the mountains weren't just always there. They were land that was underneath the water that rose up. And since we have evidence that the mountains rise, and since we don't have evidence that the mountains were always there and that they, along with all the other land on Earth, were completely covered by water, we can throw out that ancient idea that doesn't work and stick with the new idea, which is that if there are fossilized creatures from the sea on top of mountains, it's because the mountains were originally land that was under the sea. But of course, since in the Bronze Age some dumbasses wrote down these ideas that were already ancient at that time, I'm sure, you're willing to completely throw out all modern knowledge of geology. Because it's scary to be wrong.
And so the mountains rose up and the valleys of this great seas sank down, and all that water just ran off, making canyons and all the different land formations. Many of the land formations that we see today was the runoff of that water.
Man, that's some powerful runoff. Holy crap. Gee willikers, I sure am confused now. I just don't understand how them human footprints in soft mud in a riverbed from episode 8 managed to survive the flood when it can carve the fucking Grand Canyon.
Now, we have here a picture from the side of the Grand Canyon. Now, the Grand Canyon is a worldwide monument. But here's an interesting thing. If we have two people standing on the side of the Grand Canyon, one's an evolution, it says, wow, look at what a little water did over a long, long period of time. We have a creationist, a believer in the Bible, standing there and says, wow, we look at what a lot of water did in very little time.
Yeah. Funny thing though, scientific conclusions are not reached by two clowns standing on the edge of a canyon going wow and then making up whatever explanation they think sounds nice.
And here we have an excellent example that could be applied to everything we've talked about before and after that is very important. And that is that too many people think that it's a battle of sorting out different evidences.
Yeah, those people are dumb. I would never say that. Reason being, I don't try to count uncountable nouns. I might say we're trying to sort out different pieces of evidence.
It's not a matter of sorting out different evidences. It's the fact that the real battle is over the same evidence.
Okay, so evidences is plural to you. So are you saying that there's only one evidence that we're fighting over? What evidence is it? I mean, look, I know your side has only one evidence, and that all the other stuff you pretend is evidence to you is actually just you trying to piss on science. But we're not fighting with you for that particular evidence, because it's not evidence to us. So, which one are you talking about, dude?
See, both the evolutionist and the creationist both see the Grand Canyon. We both have the same evidence.
Wait, so the Grand Canyon is the one evidence that is central to the battle between creationism and science? Well, I gotta say, it's kind of underwhelming, but, alright, whatever.
And so the thing is we have to see how are we going to explain that.
Ooh, I have a great idea. 2 Thessalonians 2:11. For this reason God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. There we go. Research done. Explanation complete. Everyone who accepts any scientific conclusion is just deluded because God made them that way. Creationism 1, science 0. Suck on that, atheists.
And how are we going to do further studies?
Well, all of our studies so far came from Genesis. So, Exodus?
Now, first of all, the Grand Canyon, as you can see here, the top where the land level, flat land level was, and then the big hole that the Grand Canyon is, has lost some 900 cubic miles of earth, sand, and rock. Now, if there was the Colorado River slowly going through there, taking out little by little the Grand Canyon, what we have at the end of the canyon, we have the 900 cubic miles of earth and dirt. Guess what? It's not there. Something must have gone through there so fast to cut that all out that it just carried it right out to the ocean. There is basically no delta, just a small one, but nothing the size we expect at the end of the Grand Canyon.
Here is the Colorado River's current delta. Here is the Colorado River's former delta area. And here is what remains of the northern tip of the Gulf of California. And in fact, according to the document that I linked in the description, that X-delta, the natural dam between the Salton Sink and the Gulf of California or the Sea of Cortez, contains more than 10,000 cubic miles of the Colorado River's sediments. Contrast that with the 900 cubic miles that you, John, said simply were not there. Whoops-a-daisy. By the way, the same thing is still happening. The Colorado River still carries millions of tons of sediment, although not as much of it gets to the ocean as it used to, because we've built so many dams along it.
1 point for the creationist.
Jeez, you know? I'd make some sarcastic comment about how the ref must have missed that one or something, but you sounded so desperate just then that it tugged on the strings of my cold black atheist heart. Alright, John, the creationists can have a point. I'm sure you'll cherish it since it's the only one you've ever had.
Secondly, as we mentioned in the dinosaur talk, at the top of the canyon, there's a very thick layer of desert varnish. And that thickness is basically the same almost all the way down to just above the Colorado River, indicating that rock has been exposed for the same amount of time. That's also an amazing fact about the Grand Canyon.
For those who don't know, like me a few minutes ago, desert varnish or rock varnish is a coating that's found on rocks in deserts, which I guess is kind of obvious. There are various different kinds of it, various different minerals that make it up, so Google it if you want information. Now in the description there's an abstract from geology from 1999, which states that rock varnish grows about 1 to 40 micrometers per 1,000 years. It also says that rock varnish rarely reaches a thickness exceeding 200 micrometers regardless of age. So I'm just going to take this at face value because it's really all the information I have. And if it's true that rock varnish rarely exceeds 200 micrometers regardless of age, then for the top and the bottom of the Grand Canyon to have roughly the same thickness of rock varnish really isn't that surprising. Oh, and by the way, I wasn't even able to figure out if that's true that the Grand Canyon has the same thickness from top to bottom, and I wasn't able to find this claim on any creationist websites. So I have no idea where this comes from, or if the claim about the thickness is true.
Also, when water flows over rocks, as we see in this picture, it polishes the rock. But in the Grand Canyon, we have some really closed, tight curves cut in what is now rock. Now, if the flood occurred, then it laid down layers and layers and layers of mud. And this kind of a curvature cut in the ground could not occur if it was rock. It would never make that kind of a curve. But if it was mud, it could cut through there, and often does when the ground is soft, make very tight curves and irregular curves.
Why wouldn't it make that kind of curve in the rock? Water follows the path of least resistance. If the path of least resistance was curved in the first place, then it's going to follow a curved path and carve out that path. It's the same reason that water might carve a curved path in mud or anything else. I don't even get what you're trying to say here. Are you trying to say that rock is somehow magically different, that everything that travels on it goes in a perfectly straight line regardless of the shape of the surface of the rock? Or are you trying to say that it couldn't resist erosion, and so it would go through that part of the rock and make it so that it was a straight path instead of a curved path, but that somehow mud could resist that erosion and maintain a curved path? Either way, it is ridiculous.
Now, as we study the geography high up above the Grand Canyon, we see here the states of Utah and Arizona where the Grand Canyon is, but also of Utah and Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico. And we can see there from the geography that there used to be two large lakes up above the Grand Canyon. And the indication is that that water got stuck there after the flood. A short time after, maybe 100 years, the dike broke, and we believe that all of that water ran out and carved out the Grand Canyon probably in about a week's time.
Okay, so let me get your evidence straight. There was a lake above the Grand Canyon. Now the lake's not there, and the Grand Canyon is. Therefore, the lake entirely broke open at once, and within 1 week carved the entire Grand Canyon. Well, hey, I'm not one to naysay, but it seems like there might be one or two missing links in that chain of reasoning.
Here we have an actual map of the Grand Canyon, where on the right hand side here where the arrow is, it enters the canyon at an elevation of 2,800 feet above sea level. But it cuts out a place, the flow is towards the left or towards the west. The highest part actually cut out of the canyon is 6,000 feet above sea level. And the Colorado River leaves the canyon at an elevation of 1,800 feet above sea level. Now, folks, you know water does not go uphill. Water flows downhill. But if all that water is coming out of those lakes, it could actually build up so much to a height that it get to a height of 6,000 feet and cut the canyon out at that level, and eventually the water ran out.
Holy crap, you're totally right. If water flowed furiously out of a lake, hard enough and fast enough to carve out the Grand Canyon in a week, of course when it raged uphill it would carve a nice tidy canyon. 'Cause, that's how it works.
Now another indication of the flood is this metal pot that's being held and displayed here. And here's a testimony about it.
Whoa. Testimony doesn't work around here, buddy. Oh, all right. Where is it from?
From Silver Springs, Arkansas, that was given in the 27th of November, 1948. It says, this is by Frank J. Kimmond. While I was working in the municipal electric plant in Thomas, Oklahoma in 1912, I came upon a solid chunk of coal which was too large for us to use. I broke it with a sledgehammer. This iron pot fell from the center, leaving the impression or mold of the pot in a piece of coal. Jim Stull, an employee of the company, witnessed the breaking of the coal and saw the pot fall out. I traced the source of the coal and found that it came from Wilburton, Oklahoma mines, and is testified before the Notary Public, Julia Eldred.
Yeah, did I mention that testimony doesn't work here? 36 years after he found this thing in a piece of coal, which we don't know it necessarily actually was. We don't even know if it was actually in anything. Presumably the pot has not been investigated. But regardless, 36 years after the event, he comes forward, he testifies in front of a notary public, for reasons unknown, that it actually happened. Even if we assume that he's an expert on coal, even if we assume that he's the most honest person in the world, even if we assume that after 36 years his memory of the event is as accurate as it was on the first day, you're still trying to use one person's unsubstantiated testimony as scientific evidence, which it is not, never has been, and never will be. I don't even care if he was the most respected geologist in the whole world. It's not evidence without any physical evidence to back it up.
Now, we're often told that coal is millions of years old. And yet if there's a pot there, an iron pot, obviously a human made it.
Yeah, can you imagine if we actually had evidence for something like that? It'd be a real conundrum.
Here we have a large vein of coal. It's about 1,000 yards deep.
1,000 yards deep. Wow.
And they say that for every 10 inches of coal, you need 100 inches of vegetable material, wood shavings, and wood. Well, if this is 100 yards deep...
Wait, now it's 100 yards deep? What's it going to be next, 10? Look, I know you have trouble with the numbers and the math and the book learnings, but it would sure be nice if you'd get things right once in a while, because it's really hard to look it up when you keep changing things.
That means that we had 1,000 yards of material originally brought together in one place, and then a large layer of mud laid on top that turned to rock. What natural process is there that could do such a thing? Well, it sure sounds to me like a worldwide flood would be just the ideal thing to collect all that vegetation and then throw some mud on top, and it turns into coal.
Okay, I was going to bother to look this claim up and figure out what you're actually referring to, but then he said, well, hey, a worldwide flood sounds good to me as a thing that would throw some plants together and put some mud on top. And all I could think was, what about just the ocean? Ha! What am I talking about, though? The ocean's just a myth found in textbooks.
One thing that's been a real problem to evolutionists are what are called polystrat tree trunks.
They're vertical fossils, sure, but the problem is they don't span through multiple strata. You know, a stratum is not defined by inches on a measuring tape. You don't measure 10 feet and say, oh, there's however many strata in there because that's how big it is. If you have a layer of sediment that was all laid down pretty much at the same time from, for example, a volcano, a delta, or a glacier, that is not multiple strata just because it might be several feet high.
Like this one, which is going through a large vein of coal.
Here's an image of how these trees that supposedly run through layers of coal actually look. This particular image is from page 190 of Acadian Geology by John William Dawson, which is from 1868. As you might be able to tell, this isn't exactly news.
Now, throughout the world, we have footprints in stone, not just dinosaur and human footprints, a number of different animal footprints. Here's an amazing thing. Of all these footprints all over the world, 80% of them are going uphill. Why do you think they're going uphill? Well, I personally think that they were fleeing from the rising water level that was happening all over the world.
Presumably, you're talking about footprints that are on the same level as the dinosaur footprints, right? Not footprints that appeared later, footprints that appeared during the time of the dinosaurs, which you think ended like 4,400 years ago or whatever. In the last episode we discussed this, you gave your best examples, I shot them down. You don't get to now assert that that's fact. And I'm curious, where do you get the statistic that most footprints in the world go uphill? What literature is that in?
Interesting fact. Coincides with what the Bible says.
Ah, right, yes. The literature is that someone read the Bible, made it up, and then posted it on a forum that you happen to read.
And of course here we have a number of layers of rock, as you can see, and they're tilted. Because not only were they laid down in that way, but as the earth moved and accommodated itself, these rock layers were lifted up.
Oddly, while you were trying to lie to your audience, you actually kinda sorta almost got that right. The only thing you missed was the actual cause, which I can't really blame you for, because you don't know how mountains are formed, you don't know how strata are formed, and you clearly know nothing whatsoever about geology, chemist John Morris Pendleton.
One thing that I've got in my bag I wanted to show you is this formation. It's just two pieces of glass that has white and black sands in it.
I have a boomerang.
And it gives kind of an idea of how, by the hydraulic action, the sands separate out according to their density by just action of the water.
You know, I never thought about that before. Actually, you know what? That kind of makes it unusual that considering all that sand and dirt and rocks and stuff were mixed up by the flood, that they didn't fall down in order of density. Oh, I'm sorry, were you not finished? Go on.
Just a simple example of how those different layers were formed.
Of how those different layers were formed. Which layers? I'm not entirely sure which ones you mean. Could you maybe elaborate on that, considering that we've established that in the worldwide flood, the rocks and dirt and stuff should have fallen down in order of density? It'd be really good if you could kind of explain that a little more for us. You know, I'm not trying to put you down, and I'm not trying to tell you that you're wrong, but it would be really nice if you would explain it a little more for us, just so we can understand where you're coming from.
This fossil
Or not, I guess that's not on the syllabus.
is of a a stingray, and it says it was fossilized, splattered. Now, what process could there be that a stingray could be so perfectly encased in stone? Well, if a bunch of mud fell on it, that would do it.
I'm beginning to recognize a pattern. It seems like your one explanation for every single geological or fossilization process is just a bunch of mud fell on top of it. It was the same thing for the fossil footprints. They made the footprints in soft mud and then a bunch of mud fell on top of it. Next time, can it be Jell-O or something? Because I'm getting bored.
This came from a magazine that is not by any way Christian, but it gives a perfect, another example of the precision of the worldwide flood to conserve all these things in fossils.
You're right, man. God must have been having a weird couple of months there. He pours down water so powerfully that it can carve out the Grand Canyon in a week. But it's precise enough that all that material that's carved out of the canyon is deposited nicely at the river's delta rather than being washed out to sea. And rather than just blasting away at the hills when it hits them, it carves nice, tidy, narrow lines up them somehow. And it doesn't wash away fresh human footprints in soft mud, or dead animals that are just lying there in the muck. And when it puts a dollop of mud on top of something, it stays there despite all the water gushing around. That really is pretty remarkable precision. If I were a real jerkhead skeptic person, I'd be really tempted to say it's a flaw with your hypothesis, but I'm not, so I won't.
Also, throughout the earth, we have curved, bent stone. Now, if you try to bend stone, it's going to be a little difficult. If you bend it too much, if you're that strong, you could break it, but you can't bend it. It's not like a piece of rubber or plastic.
When it's hot or under pressure, it is.
And of course, it can only fold like that if they are soft. If they are of a nature like mud. And of course, that's what would happen after the flood. As the earth begins to accommodate itself, these things are moving. And of course, those layers are being compressed.
It's funny you should mention things being compressed, because that's another thing I wanted to mention. Confining pressure reduces the risk of brittle fracture, thereby increasing the probability of bending or folding. Pressure and temperature are basically the causes of folds that you're talking about, and you just acknowledged that by saying the Earth was readjusting itself and these things were compressed. See, you don't need a flood to explain the pressure and temperature required to achieve these folds. There's more than enough pressure and temperature within the Earth's crust to create these, especially if they're buried quite deeply and then surface later. You're saying that these rocks had to be soft like mud, and you imply that for these rocks to be bent in these folds, they actually had to be soft mud. You know, rock is not a synonym for dry mud. There are rocks in those folds that aren't made out of mud. I know that's surprising.
One other excellent example of the flood are the diatoms. Now, the diatoms are beautiful gems that live in the oceans. They are microscopic, and they are beautifully formed. Now, when a lot of especially hot water will hit these, they will die. They will die literally by the millions. And then they just begin slowly filtering down to the bottom of the ocean. Well, there's a mine in California where they actually mine out the silica. Well, as they're going through this mine, they find a skeleton of a whale standing upon his tail, all surrounded by these diatoms. Well, now, what process is there possible to have killed off so many diatoms, gotten so many of them together into one place, and to bury a whale upon his tail?
Alright, so despite you, John, trying to make this difficult on me as usual, I found this claim easily enough. I've put a link in the description about this whale skeleton. Basically, it was not vertical like it was in that picture that you showed, John. This picture, it was actually on about a 50-degree angle, like in this picture. What happened is that the strata were laid down, and then they were pushed upwards after, as you can see by how the strata run at the same angle as the whale.
Well, the worldwide flood would do that, especially when the Earth's crust would split. The hot liquid rock, the magma, would hit the water, causing explosions. A lot of heat and a lot of diatoms would die.
I don't know what the situation was with the whale specifically, and I'm not going to bother to research it too much. The Talk Origins article claims that they found another whale that was undergoing the same process, just in an earlier stage. Doesn't matter to me if that's true, because what you're saying is the worldwide flood would cause cracks in the Earth's crust that would release magma and heat up the water and kill diatoms, which would float down and cover up the whale. And my question is, why is the worldwide flood necessary again? There are cracks in the Earth's crust all the time. It's a very common occurrence, so for you to say that a worldwide flood is required is pretty disingenuous.
And the ocean currents could bring these together into one place. Now, I don't believe the whale was buried standing up. I think it was buried laying down. But as the Earth accommodated itself, that it stood it upright.
Wow, I did not expect you to say that. I went to all that trouble of saying that the whale wasn't buried standing up, and then you come along and say it yourself. I honestly don't really know what to make of this. It feels like my world just turned upside down, or at least tilted 50 degrees.
Also, after the flood, for the first time, we see the rainbow. How come we never saw it before? Well, for one thing, it didn't rain.
In another video, I thought you just made that up, but people have informed me in the comments that people actually believe that. Like, people who aren't you. I guess I can't say I'm surprised, but well, no. I guess I can't say I'm disappointed either. I was already about as disappointed as you can get. I don't know. I'm something. What do you call it when your brain head desks against your skull without you actually moving your head?
And for the second thing, because it says there was a vapor that came out from the Earth that watered the face of the Earth. Also, we had that covering of water that didn't give direct sunlight to the Earth in order to form that separating out that spectrum of light as we see through the rainbow. And so that's the first time the rainbow appears is after the flood. Again, that agrees with the biblical data that we had about the water above the Earth before.
So for that whole speech, I was standing here listening to you reciting myths from the Bible. And then at the end, you said that those myths from the Bible agree with the Bible, as if that means something, and blood shot out of my eyes, and now I have to clean up my entire room. I'll send you an invoice.
Well, what happened to the dinosaurs?
Run! Destroy it! Scientific fact.
Well, there's this is kind of my idea what started the flood. I could be wrong in this, but it's been helpful to some people and it seems to fit together with the facts. We're doing more investigation, but I'd like to share it because it's been helpful. They say that there was a big meteorite that fell down by the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico that caused such a shock wave that killed the dinosaurs. Now, I don't doubt that meteorites and comets could have hit the Earth, probably did hit the Earth, and provoke that canopy of water to begin coming down.
What do you even mean? Do you mean that they hit the Earth and that shockwave on Earth somehow affected a floating orbital layer of water around the Earth? Or do you mean that they smashed through the layer of water around the Earth, somehow causing it to all fall down at the same time? Which, I don't know, maybe if you had like hundreds and hundreds of the things, I mean, it's a sphere of water. It's not one thing that you can just knock down. Maybe if you caused enough disturbance, you could make it fall out of orbit quicker. But when we're talking about the Yucatan one that happened at the end of the time of the dinosaurs, there's one. So, what?
Now, what I propose, and let me explain the different parts, is that I think that a big comet hit the Earth. Now, comets are basically a big ball of ice, and it's about 200 degrees centigrade below zero. Basically, the temperature that outer space is, which is just 3 degrees Kelvin. Now, as it came closer to the Earth, I believe it separated into different pieces which impacted the Earth. Some of these impacts, I believe, were in the area of Hudson Bay. As you can see, the curves on the shoreline here in the lower southeastern corner, you see almost a complete semicircle where there was some kind of a meteorite or comet impact.
That's lovely that you believe that, John. You believe every vaguely circular-looking shape on Earth is a crater. I believe every vaguely canal-looking thing on Mars is a Martian-made irrigation system. And I believe that you can build a working combustion engine out of cottage cheese and toothpicks. Wouldn't the world just work so much nicer if we could just make up whatever we want to believe, have everyone else believe it, and never do any investigation whatsoever to see if it's actually true? The fact that you scroll around Google Earth for a while looking for things that look circular, saying that's a crater, that's a crater, that's a crater, doesn't mean they're actually craters. If you want to be a geologist so bad and prove the Hudson Bay is a crater, why don't you take off your fucking lab coat, get an education, go out in the field, and actually prove it?
Also, the glacier cap, or the whole glacial extent that covered the northern hemisphere, had its center this side of the North Pole and went as far southwest as Kansas City. Some have said that there was as much as 1 mile thick, that layer of ice. It extended more to our western hemisphere than it did to the eastern hemisphere of our globe. Now the thing is, that's important because when that comet hit, if in fact it happened that way, that it would send a shock wave of cold.
Fascinating. Remind me, how many nuclear bombs worth of energy would that comet release? Do you honestly think that just because it's ice, it's going to release a wave of cold rather than vaporizing everything in its path? When a gigantic comet speeding through the universe at tens of thousands of miles per hour collides with an object, cold is the last thing that is going to sweep across the face of that object. What else could you possibly think would happen to all that energy? I'm glad I've never heard you call yourself a physicist in addition to chemist, scientist, auto mechanic, professor.
And so, anyway, there you have all this water in the form of ice, and so that would explain, too, why the continents were all connected. You lower the ocean levels by some 200 feet, you can walk around the world. And that's how the kangaroo hopped from the Ark and following generations all the way to Australia.
Okay, let me see if I understand the sequence of events correctly. The comet comes down, kicking off the flood in some unexplained way. It crashes into Hudson Bay, creating that semicircular portion on the southeastern part of it, throws ice everywhere, releasing no heat energy whatsoever. All the ice sits there, cooling the earth down like an icebox. Then the flood comes down. It rains so much that it covers all the mountains. There's so much heat and pressure that tectonic plates move, folds appear in rocks, the bottom of the sea cracks open, releasing magma, killing diatoms by the billions, as you stated earlier. Other similar events happen. However, the ice from the comet remains in place. Then, the water from the flood recedes, I guess disappearing into the hollow center of the earth where the mole people live, leaving the seas at 200 feet below their current level. Then the ice from the comet, which is still somehow there, melts and fills the sea up 200 feet. Now I should mention that your claim is not very clear, John, so it could mean that this ice comet you're talking about was large enough that when it melted it would raise the water level 200 feet, which is what I'm assuming, or it could mean that it was so large that it actually chilled the northern hemisphere so cold for so long that the ice built up to a mile thick, as you say. Considering that, as we'll see, the Antarctic ice sheet is slightly larger than this object, and it has not managed to cool the entire southern hemisphere to the point of having ice up to a mile thick on all the land, I'm giving you a lot more credit by assuming that what you mean is that it's large enough to increase the water level by 200 feet over the entire globe. Do I have all that right? It's the best I can piece together from your incoherent rambling. Now that all sounds absolutely ridiculous, and I could stop right here without talking about this anymore, and you would come off looking like an absolute fool. But I'm curious about the comet. See, even just from a basic quick mental check of whether or not this seems plausible, it seems completely improbable, impossible, and stupid. I want to check out a few things about this comet and see if I'm actually right. These are calculations that you, John, have failed to do, clearly. So, I want to know 3 things. The first is the diameter of this comet. That's assuming it's a perfect sphere of pure water ice. You do imply that it's pure water ice or mostly water ice. The second is the mass of the comet, and the third is the energy that would be released by the impact of the comet. So, first, diameter. Here's the math I used to get the diameter, which I found out is 350.7525 kilometers. Fun facts about this. For a sense of scale, the object that caused the Chicxulub crater in the Yucatan, that's the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, had a diameter of about 10 kilometers, 35 times less than this comet, and it left a mere 180 kilometer crater. A cross-section down the middle of this sphere would have an area of 96,625.4 square kilometers, which is larger than Indiana, which has an area of 94,321 square kilometers. Now, I looked at the diameter of the semicircular area of Hudson Bay, which John believes is a crater, roughly at these coordinates. It's only around 450 kilometers in diameter. Might be a little bit more, 475, something like that. So if this comet landed there with its diameter of 350 kilometers, it would have left a crater only about 1.3 times its own diameter. And finally, the volume of ice in this comet is 22.6 million cubic kilometers. The entire Antarctic ice sheet is 26.5 million cubic kilometers. If the entire Antarctic ice sheet melted today, and assuming it was all sitting on land and not partially underwater, it would raise the level of the world's oceans by 230 feet. That's just slightly more than the 200 feet that John proposes, so it's confirmation that my numbers are more or less right so far. Number 2. Mass. So, as most people probably know, 1 liter of water weighs 1 kilogram. Now, the volume is liquid water, which we figured out in the previous step, is 20,728,821.6262 kilometers cubed. That translates to 2.0729 times 10 to the 19 liters, and so its mass is 2.0729 times 10 to the 19 kilograms. Number 3. Energy. So now I have all the information I need to figure out the energy released by this object and get an idea of its impact on the Earth. And at this point I can cheat. So I go to the Earth Impact Effects program, and I punch in my values. Distance from impact doesn't matter to me because that just tells you what happens to an object that's sitting at a certain distance from the impact, if it's ejected, stuff like that. We put in 350 kilometers for the diameter, a density of 1,000 kilograms per cubic meter for ice. Impact velocity. The minimum impact velocity with Earth due to gravitational attraction is 11.2 kilometers per second. This page says that, and I put a link in the description to another document that says that. Impact angle. 45 degrees is the most probable, so I've used that. Target parameters, I've said sedimentary rock. And here are the results. 3.6 times 10 to the 11 megatons of TNT. In kilotons, that's 336 trillion. Fun fact, the Hiroshima bomb Little Boy had a blast yield of 16 kilotons. So this comet releases the energy directly onto Earth's surface of 21 trillion Hiroshima bombs. And remember, that's traveling at the minimum impact velocity. And the average comet impact velocity, according to the people at the Earth Impact Effects program, is not 11.2 kilometers per second, but 51 kilometers per second. Use the application yourself and see just how much energy that releases. Long story short, you should listen to yourself, John. You are seriously proposing that a comet with a cross-section the size of Indiana crashed into Hudson Bay just over 4,000 years ago, barely created any crater whatsoever, and instead of roasting everything for thousands of miles around, it just casually tossed a bunch of ice across the northern part of the globe, which remained frozen, melted slowly during the inexplicable kangaroo exodus to Australia, and then disappeared, leaving no trace at all of its ever having existed. You say that this hypothesis has helped people, that it fits together with the facts, and that you're still investigating. And so I have to ask, how is it that your investigations have not yet included doing the basic calculations to figure out the implications of this hypothetical comet's collision? The only possibilities are that you're stupid, lazy, or dishonest. And I'm inclined to believe you're all three at once. But regardless of what combination of those three things you are damn sure no scientist.
The flood really did happen. But let's look at what the Bible says in 2 Peter chapter 3.
No. That didn't work out well last time.
It says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts. Now, that was written about 2,000 years ago, and boy, it seems like that more than ever.
I bet you get that a lot, yeah.
People just love to scoff. You don't believe the Bible, do you? Man, that's an old book. Get up to date.
We don't scoff at you for believing in the Bible because it's old. If you believed in Twilight, we'd still scoff at you.
And their lusts, we see it on just about every place we turn, or turn on the TV, or what have you.
I got a boner right now.
And they're saying, where is the promise of his coming? When's Jesus coming back?
Oh, I thought you were talking about atheists or something. People who aren't exactly inclined to believe the stories in the New Testament. But I guess that's not who you mean, so, sorry for telling you about my boner.
For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation.
Speaking of falling asleep, it's past my bedtime. Can we stop now?
It says, for this they are willingly ignorant. In the Greek that means dumb on purpose.
I'm pretty sure the word ignorant doesn't mean anything in the Greek.
That by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, the flood, perished.
You just did a whole video based on the premise that it mentions the flood in the Bible, all the while assuming that your audience was aware of what the flood was supposed to have been and what its significance was. You don't need to read a whole page of where the flood is mentioned in the Bible to convince us that it is. We get it.
But the heavens and the earth which are now, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. You see, with the flood there was a judgment with water, but God promises another judgment, and this time it's going to be of fire.
Judging by that massive worldwide life-destroying comet that you mentioned, it kind of sounds like the first one was with fire too.
And we've got, again, powerful answers that are changing many lives.
Well, I can't speak for anyone else, but I know you're changing my life. Unfortunately, it is for the drastically worse.
We'll see you soon. God bless you.
Finally! So, I know I said I was going to tell you the story of how I escaped Opinionville, but you know what? It's so far past my bedtime by now that I can't stay up any longer. So, I think I'll just go and never tell the story, ever. See you later.
Your thoughts are broken, your reason